The sun had barely risen, spilling pale gold across the cobblestone courtyard of the Greyspire orphanage. Elier huddled by the fountain, his small hands clutching a tattered notebook, pages smeared with ink and smudges from hurried scribbles. Around him, the other children scurried about, some laughing, some cowering under the sharp eyes of the caretakers. Elier's heart thumped unevenly, not from play, but from the dread he carried like a stone in his chest. Madame Vorn, the head caretaker, stomped across the courtyard. Her long cloak flared like a dark shadow. "Elier," she barked, voice slicing through the morning air. "Come here, boy." He obeyed, knowing better than to argue. As he stepped forward, he noticed the cruel smirk on her face. She favored certain children, those who obeyed without question, who snickered at the weak. Elier had never been one of those. Earlier that morning, he had seen something he should never have witnessed. A city official, cloaked in finery and arrogance, sneaking coins from the orphanage's donation chest. The man's laughter had echoed in the empty hall, chilling Elier's blood. He had watched, frozen, but when the children's eyes met his in silent accusation, he knew he had to speak the truth. Now, trembling but resolute, Elier lifted his chin. "Sir, the coins, they were taken. I saw him." Madame Vorn's eyes widened, then narrowed. "You dare accuse a man of the court?" Her hands flew to his shoulders, shaking him. "How dare you?" The courtyard fell silent. Children scattered to the edges, peeking from behind walls and barrels. Elier's knees trembled, but he did not retract his words. "Truth is not a crime," he whispered, almost to himself. Madame Vorn's fury roared louder than ever. She grabbed a thin cane from her belt and struck Elier across the back. The child's breath left him in a gasp. Again, and again. Each blow drew a sharp cry from him that echoed through the cold, gray stone walls. The children flinched and ducked, yet none dared intervene. When the beating ended, Elier lay on the ground, bruised and gasping, the taste of blood bitter on his lips. Madame Vorn stepped back, hands on hips, satisfied. "Let this be a lesson," she snapped. "The truth belongs to the powerful, boy, not to the likes of you." Elier struggled to his knees, chest heaving, eyes burning with unshed tears. Shame and fear mingled with a stubborn pride. He had spoken the truth. That alone gave him a flicker of courage, even as pain pulsed through his body. As he glanced toward the horizon, where the spires of the palace shimmered in the morning light, a whisper of hope stirred within him. He had heard tales of the king, a just man, they said, who valued honesty above flattery. A distant, impossible dream, yet Elier clung to it, imagining a ruler who might see the courage in a small, beaten boy. In the courtyard, the children resumed their timid games, glancing at Elier with a mixture of awe and fear. For the first time, some dared to believe that perhaps truth, even from the powerless, might matter. Elier rose slowly, clutching his notebook against his chest. He limped toward the back of the courtyard, toward the shadows where no one could see the tears that threatened to spill. But his heart was steady. Though beaten, humiliated, and alone, he had spoken the truth, and somewhere in that act, he had planted the seed of change. Above, the wind whispered through the cracks in the stone walls, carrying faint rumors from the palace. A king who would listen. A king who might kneel for justice. Elier's eyes glinted with quiet resolve. One day he vowed the truth would not hurt him, it would set the world right. The bruises on Elier's back were still tender, purple and angry against pale skin. Every movement reminded him of the punishment, each breath a dull ache in his chest. He walked through the corridors of Greyspire Orphanage with his head lowered, careful not to attract attention, careful not to breathe too loudly. The other children avoided him. Some feared the same wrath he had endured. Others whispered about his bravery in hushed tones, as if the mere mention of his name could summon Madame Vorn's fury once more. At mealtime, Elier sat alone on the far edge of the dining hall. The bowls of watery gruel steamed faintly in front of him, untouched. A soft voice interrupted the silence. "Elier." He looked up to see Mara, another orphan, a girl about his age with dark eyes full of warmth and understanding. She slid onto the bench beside him, ignoring the sharp glances from the other children. "You don't have to stay quiet all the time," she said gently. "I know what happened. And you were right." Elier's lips pressed into a thin line. "Being right doesn't matter here. It only brings more pain." Mara shook her head. "Maybe. But truth is never wrong. And you're not like the others. You don't just follow orders. You think." For a moment, Elier felt a spark of comfort, a fleeting connection in a world that had become harsh and unforgiving. But it faded quickly as Madame Vorn's voice cut through the hall. "Elier, to the courtyard." Now. He obeyed, knowing the punishment could continue, though he had done nothing wrong this time. In the courtyard, a small group of older orphans had gathered. Elier knew they were the enforcers of Madame Vorn's cruelty, taking pleasure in belittling those weaker than themselves. One boy, Tomas, stepped forward, smirking. "Careful, Elier," he sneered. "One more word about the officials, and you might not walk again." Elier's jaw tightened. Fear rippled through him, but it was tempered by stubborn defiance. He remembered the stolen coins, the laughter of the corrupt man, and the knowledge that silence would only protect the guilty. Over the next few days, Elier found small ways to act with integrity, though each act brought new challenges. He returned a lost loaf of bread to a hungry younger child, only for the older orphans to snatch it back and mock him. He tried to warn the children of unsafe conditions in the kitchen, only to have Madame Vorn dismiss his warnings and call him a meddlesome brat. Yet, despite the constant punishment and isolation, Elier held to his sense of right and wrong. Even in the face of fear, he could not lie. At night, when the other children slept fitfully on thin mats, Elier would sit by the small barred window in his room. He pressed his hand to the cold glass, staring at the distant spires of the palace that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Rumors had begun to circulate among the townspeople, whispers of a brave orphan who refused to bow to lies or fear. Some spoke in admiration, others in caution, warning the orphanage staff to watch him closely. Elier listened, the flickering candlelight casting shadows across his bruised face. He felt the weight of loneliness pressing down, a hollow ache in his chest. But he also felt something else, a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth he carried mattered more than the pain it caused. The weeks that followed tested him relentlessly. Tasks that were once mundane became instruments of punishment. A spilled bucket of water could earn him a lash. A misplaced broom could draw ridicule and scorn. And yet each time he endured, each time he faced the cruelty with a steadfast gaze, Elier's resolve grew. Mara remained his constant companion, a reminder that he was not entirely alone. She whispered encouragement, shared stolen morsels of bread, and listened when he recounted the injustices he witnessed in the orphanage and town. Slowly, other children began to notice, some in fear, some in awe. They saw a boy who, though beaten and mocked, would not bow. But the tension escalated. Madame Vorn, frustrated by her inability to bend him completely, whispered to the higher authorities in town. The corrupt officials, fearing exposure, began to watch Elier more closely. Threats loomed: heavier labor, public humiliation, and at times cruel games designed to test his courage and break his spirit. One evening, Elier returned from chores, bones aching, and found Tomas and two other boys waiting. They shoved him to the ground, laughing cruelly. "Do you really think you can stand against everyone?" Tomas taunted. "Even the king wouldn't care about a little orphan." Elier pressed his palm to the dirt, the grit biting into his skin. He met Tomas's gaze steadily, voice low but unwavering. "Truth matters," he said. "Even if no one else sees it. Even if everyone hurts me. I will not lie." The boys sneered and walked away, leaving him bruised and bleeding, but somehow still upright. As Elier limped back to the orphanage, the distant palace lights glimmered again through the trees. He allowed himself a small, quiet thought. Somewhere out there the king might see him, might care. That flicker of hope, fragile as it was, pushed him forward through the endless days of suffering. For the first time, Elier understood that courage was not the absence of fear, it was moving forward despite it. And though despair pressed close, he would not let it conquer him. The attic of Greyspire Orphanage smelled of dust and damp wood. Elier crouched in a corner, notebook clutched tightly against his chest, ears straining for any sound of the caretakers. Sunlight filtered through a cracked window, illuminating motes of dust that floated like tiny stars. Earlier that day he had overheard a conversation between Madame Vorn and one of the town officials, the very man who had stolen from the orphanage. Words like "cover up," "discreet," and "keep the boy quiet" made Elier's stomach twist in fear and anger. They were plotting to hide their crime and, worse, punish anyone who dared speak. But Elier was not silent. Not anymore. Creeping through the attic, he found a stack of ledgers and letters the officials had hidden away. Hands trembling, he opened a ledger and discovered the truth laid bare. Embezzled coins, forged documents, and bribes exchanged behind closed doors. Each page confirmed what he had suspected, each signature a mark of betrayal. He pressed a hand to his chest, the weight of the evidence almost too much to bear. Fear and excitement tangled inside him. If anyone saw these, he would be beaten again or worse. Yet for the first time he felt the glimmer of power that truth could bring. He had proof. That night, as he returned to his dormitory, Mara greeted him in the shadows. "You look like a storm is brewing in your chest," she whispered. Elior nodded. "I found the ledger. All of it, proof of their lies." His voice trembled, not from fear, but from the enormity of the responsibility. "But what if I speak? What if they hurt me more? What if no one believes me?" Mara's eyes shone in the dim light. "Then they will see you, Elior. And maybe, just maybe, someone else will see too." Scene, palace glimpse and rumors. Days passed, and whispers reached the ears of those far above the orphanage walls. The king, a man of fairness and rare patience, had begun hearing of a boy who refused to bend to fear, a child who had seen corruption and dared to speak. His advisors reported it cautiously, wary of stirring unrest among the town's officials. The king studied the reports quietly in his chamber, eyes narrowed. There was something unsettling about the courage of a small boy, the persistence of one voice amid the clamor of lies and flattery. He did not know the child's name, yet already he felt a pull, a strange, unexplainable sense that justice might be brewing in the hands of this small, defiant figure. Meanwhile, Elior's courage quietly spread among the children and townspeople. People began murmuring that he was different, that he did not cower before cruelty. Small gestures of admiration reached him, a nod, a whispered "thank you," a loaf of bread left anonymously at the orphanage. It was not much, but it gave him strength. Scene, confronting the fear within. One evening, under the cover of darkness, Elior slipped out of the orphanage to meet a former servant of the officials, a woman named Leora, who had quietly resented the corruption she had witnessed. She handed him more letters and coins that had been hidden as bribes. "Be careful, child," she warned, her eyes darting nervously. "If Madame Vorn or the officials catch you, you won't survive a second beating." "I have to try," Elior whispered, clutching the papers. "Even if I fail, someone must know the truth." Fear gnawed at him relentlessly. He imagined the officials discovering the ledger in his hands, dragging him into the courtyard for another public humiliation. But the thought of remaining silent, of allowing injustice to continue, was unbearable. Courage, he realized, was not the absence of fear. It was choosing to act despite it. Scene, the unexpected summons. A week later, a royal messenger arrived at the orphanage. The children watched nervously from behind windows as he approached Elior's door. "You boy," the messenger said, voice crisp. "The king requests your presence at the palace. At once." Elior froze. His heart pounded violently in his chest. The king? Could it be real? Or was this some cruel trick, a trap set by Madame Vorn or the corrupt officials? Mara's hand on his shoulder steadied him. "Go," she urged softly. "This may be your chance." Trembling, bruised, and still aching from past beatings, Elior followed the messenger through the streets. As the palace gates rose before him, gleaming in the late afternoon sun, he felt a strange mix of fear, awe, and hope. He was a small boy, battered and alone, stepping into a world of power and intrigue. Inside the grand hall, servants bowed, tapestries fluttered, and the king's advisors watched with cautious eyes. The king himself sat upon his throne, face calm, but with an intensity in his gaze that made Elior's stomach twist. The room was silent as the king spoke. "You are the boy who dares to speak the truth even when beaten?" Elior swallowed hard. He could see the curiosity and weight of judgment in the king's eyes. I am, your majesty," he said, voice small but steady. "I have seen wrongdoing, and I could not stay silent." The king's gaze softened slightly, but his expression remained guarded. "And yet here you stand despite the threats, the pain, and the fear." "Yes, your majesty," Elior said, a tremor in his voice. Because truth matters. Even if it hurts. Even if it is only one small voice." For the first time, Elior felt a faint glimmer of hope beyond the endless suffering of the orphanage. He had been brave enough to witness injustice and brave enough to seek the truth. Now, perhaps, someone powerful would see it, and justice could be more than a whispered dream. The king leaned back slightly, folding his hands. His mind wrestled with the weight of power and the corruption surrounding his court. One boy. Beaten, alone but unbroken. Could the courage of a child stir change in a kingdom? Elior's heart pounded in the silence. He did not yet know the answer, but for the first time he dared to hope. The grand hall was vast and echoing, its marble floors polished to a mirror-like shine. Sunlight streamed through towering stained-glass windows, painting the room with fractured colors. Servants, nobles, and officials filled the hall, murmuring quietly, waiting for the king's next words. At the center, Elior stood alone, bruised, clutching the ledger and letters that proved the corruption he had witnessed. His legs trembled, but his chin was held high. The king sat upon his throne, tall and imposing, yet there was a calm deliberation in his gaze. Beside him, advisors whispered into the air, their faces tight with concern. Madame Vorn and the corrupt officials were also present, their expressions masks of feigned control, though Elior could sense the fear behind the thin smiles. The king's voice rang out, steady and commanding. "Child, you have come before me with words of truth. Speak. Let all hear what you have seen." Elior swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the room pressing down upon him. He opened the ledger, his fingers trembling slightly, and began. I saw coins taken from the orphanage. I saw letters exchanged, bribes hidden. Madame Vorn, she struck me when I spoke, tried to silence me. The officials of this town, they betrayed the trust of the people, the king's law, and the children of the orphanage. A murmur spread through the hall. Some gasped. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Madame Vorn stepped forward, her voice sharp and cutting. "Lies. This boy fabricates stories to gain attention. He is nothing but a troublemaker." The officials nodded, adding, "This child is too small to understand the affairs of grown men. He speaks foolishness, your majesty." Elior's pulse hammered in his chest. The power in the room was overwhelming. Every whisper, every accusation felt like it could crush him. But he steadied himself, drawing courage from the weeks of suffering he had endured. He raised his voice, clear and unwavering. "I have proof." He held the ledger high, letting the sunlight catch the edges of the papers. "All of this shows the truth. I have seen it with my own eyes. I speak for the children of the orphanage, for those too weak to speak for themselves. I tell you the truth." The king leaned forward slightly, studying the boy. His silence was heavier than any voice. The courtiers waited, tense, sensing that the balance of power in the room could shift with a single word. Madame Vorn scoffed. "A boy against years of service? You will believe him over those who have sworn loyalty to the crown." The king's gaze did not waver. Slowly he rose from his throne, the room falling utterly silent. Each movement was deliberate enough to make every heart in the hall beat faster. "You have suffered," the king said, his voice resonant, echoing off the marble walls. "You have been beaten, humiliated, and threatened. And yet you have not lied. You have not cowered." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You have spoken the truth when it would have been easier to remain silent." Elior's eyes widened, disbelief and hope flickering across his bruised face. "Madame Vorn, you have betrayed your duty. These officials have betrayed their oaths. And yet," the king continued, stepping down from the throne, "the courage of one small child has revealed what many feared to see." He walked closer to Elior, his presence massive and commanding, yet there was a softness in his gaze. Then, in a gesture that silenced the hall completely, the king removed his crown and knelt before the orphan. "Elior," he said, voice low and reverent, "it is you who holds the strength of this kingdom in your heart. It is your courage that commands respect, even from a king." Gasps erupted throughout the hall. Nobles and officials whispered, eyes wide with shock. Some bowed their heads in shame. Others looked on, uncertain how to respond. Elior felt tears sting his eyes. Never had he imagined such recognition. The boy who had been beaten and humiliated now held the gaze of the king, and it was he who had the king's respect. Madame Vorn's face drained of color. The officials shifted uneasily, their confidence unraveling. One of them muttered, "Impossible, a child." The king straightened, addressing the entire assembly. "Let this be known, corruption will not hide behind fear or power. Justice belongs to truth, to those brave enough to uphold it, regardless of age or station. Elior has shown us all that courage is not measured in years or wealth, but in the steadfastness of the heart." Elior's legs trembled beneath him. He lowered the ledger slowly, still holding it as proof of the wrongs he had uncovered. He realized that the fear he had carried for so long, the isolation, the beatings, the mockery, was giving way to something he had only dared to hope for: recognition, validation, and the first taste of justice. The king raised his voice again. "Madame Vorn, you will face the consequences of your actions. These officials will answer for their crimes. And the children of the orphanage, they will know protection and care, as befits their innocence and dignity." The hall erupted. Some officials tried to argue, but their words fell flat against the weight of the king's authority. Even those who had supported Madame Vorn and the corrupt men could do nothing. The evidence was undeniable, the boy's courage unassailable. Elior stood, chest heaving, tears running freely. He had faced the impossible, the full power of adults, the might of the system, and had not been broken. And now, in the silence of the hall that followed, he realized that courage had a ripple effect. One small voice could move even the highest throne. The king knelt once more briefly and whispered, "You have restored honor to us all." And for the first time in his young life, Elier felt truly seen, not for his weakness, not for his status, not for his fears, but for the unwavering strength of his heart. The courtiers whispered, the nobles murmured, but Elier barely noticed. All he could feel was a profound, quiet certainty. The world could change, even if only because one child had refused to bow to fear. The air in Greyspire Orphanage felt different that morning. Sunlight spilled across the courtyard, catching the worn stones in a golden glow. For the first time in years, the children moved without fear, their laughter tentative but real. Elier walked among them, still bruised from past beatings, but his steps were steady. Madame Vorn had been removed from her position, escorted from the orphanage by royal guards under the king's decree. The corrupt officials had been called to answer for their crimes, and their arrogance crumbled beneath the weight of proof and public scrutiny. The orphanage had a new head caretaker now, a woman named Sister Lyra, who moved with quiet authority and kindness. She had reorganized the schedules, ensured the children received proper meals, and most importantly, treated them with respect and fairness. Elier helped the younger children wash their clothes by the fountain, his hands rough from scrubbing yet gentle as he guided small fingers through the soapy water. A smile touched his face for the first time in weeks, a smile that was not forced, not fleeting, but real. Mara appeared beside him, holding a small bundle of bread. "Look," she said softly, handing him a piece, "even the townspeople are leaving gifts. They've heard what you did." Elier took the bread, holding it in his hands as if it were a symbol of the change that had begun. "I didn't do this alone," he said. "You helped me. The others, they all helped in their own way even if they were afraid to speak." Mara's eyes shone. "And now they see that courage matters more than fear." Seen, recognition from the king. Later that day, a royal carriage arrived at the orphanage gates. The children watched, wide-eyed and whispering excitedly. Elier's heart raced as the king himself stepped down, surrounded by advisors and guards. He approached the small boy with measured steps, his expression calm but filled with warmth. "You have done more than I could have imagined," the king said, his voice resonating through the courtyard. "Your courage has restored justice not only here but across the town and palace. You have reminded us all that truth is more powerful than fear, and integrity stronger than corruption." Elier bowed low, humility and pride mingling in his chest. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I only did what I thought was right." The king smiled gently. "And in doing so, you have taught us all a lesson we would do well to remember. From this day forward, you shall have my protection, and the orphanage will receive the support it needs to thrive." Whispers of awe and admiration rippled through the children. They had witnessed the impossible, a small, beaten orphan standing unbroken before the highest authority in the land. Seen changes and ripple effects. Weeks turned into months and Elier's life began to transform. The orphanage was rebuilt in both structure and spirit. New supplies arrived and the children received education, clothing, and medical care. The staff worked with care, fostering curiosity, compassion, and honesty. Elier, once silent and fearful, now spoke openly. He guided younger children in reading and writing, teaching them that courage was not about muscles or age, it was about standing up for what was right, even when it hurt. Even Mara, who had always been quiet and observant, found her voice strengthened. Together, they encouraged the other orphans to see themselves as capable of change, of standing against injustice, and of being seen. In the town, rumors of the brave orphan spread further. Merchants, townspeople, and even minor nobles who had witnessed his courage began to treat the orphanage with respect. Donations arrived not only for supplies but for scholarships, apprenticeships, and education. The ripple effect of one child's bravery reached farther than Elier could have imagined. Scene, reflection and emotional closure. One quiet evening, Elier sat by the fountain, Mara beside him, watching the sun sink behind the palace spires. The courtyard was filled with laughter, splashing water, and the soft hum of children at play. Elier closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the fear, the beatings, the isolation he had endured. Pain that once seemed endless now felt like a shadow behind him, a reminder of the strength he had found within. "I never imagined it could change like this," Mara said softly. "All because you spoke the truth." Elier smiled faintly, a mixture of humility and quiet pride. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us. Courage doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to anyone brave enough to act." The palace bells chimed in the distance, a reminder that justice, once delayed, could finally reach those who deserved it. Elior pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the notebook still tucked safely beneath his arm. The record of injustice now transformed into a symbol of hope and change. The king's actions had shown the children that even those in power could be humble, just, and compassionate. And the orphans, once invisible and voiceless, now understood that their lives could hold meaning, that their voices could be heard. Elior looked around at the courtyard, at the children running and laughing freely, at Mara's bright eyes, at the golden sunlight spilling over the stones. He felt something swell in his chest. Pride, yes, but also gratitude and a quiet hope for the future. Even in the face of cruelty, even when beaten and mocked, he had chosen truth. And now, in the gentle warmth of justice fulfilled, he realized that truth had a power beyond his imagination. It could transform lives, rebuild hearts, and even change a kingdom. Elior smiled, a small, steady smile that held the weight of experience and the light of hope. He had faced despair and emerged stronger, and the world, though still flawed, had begun to bend toward justice. For the first time, he believed that courage and integrity were not just ideals, but forces capable of reshaping reality. And that knowledge, more than anything, would carry him forward, wherever life might lead. The palace gardens were alive with the soft hum of spring. Flowers bloomed in neat rows, their colors vivid against the green of trimmed hedges. Birds chirped among the branches, and the distant spires of the city gleamed in the morning sunlight. Children played freely on the manicured lawns, laughing, chasing one another through the fountain's sparkling sprays. Elior, no longer a small, bruised boy but a young man of quiet strength, walked among them. His back was straight, his steps confident. He no longer needed to hide from cruelty or fear. The boy who had been beaten for speaking the truth had grown into a man who understood that courage could shape lives far beyond one moment. He paused to watch Mara, now a young woman, kneeling beside a group of children, guiding them in reading and arithmetic. The orphanage had flourished, relocated to a spacious building near the palace, staffed with kind and dedicated caretakers. Education, compassion, and justice now defined its halls. Elior's gaze drifted toward the palace itself. The king, older but still steady in his fairness, had become more than a distant figure of authority. He had become a mentor, a protector of those who could not protect themselves. Many of the officials who had once plotted in secrecy were gone, replaced by advisors of integrity, inspired in part by the courage of a small boy who refused to bow to fear. Scene: Reflection on courage and truth. Elior stood by the fountain, letting the morning sun warm his face. He traced the carved stone edge with his hand, feeling the years etched into its surface, much like the years etched into his own life. He remembered the fear that had once gripped him, the beatings, the isolation, the whispers that he would amount to nothing. And he remembered the first time he had dared to speak the truth, trembling, voice cracking, yet unbroken. Courage, he whispered to himself, is not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. The words felt alive, carried by the wind through the gardens, mingling with the laughter of children who now lived free from oppression. The orphanage, once a place of suffering, had become a sanctuary. The lessons of integrity and bravery that he had learned were now being passed to a new generation. Scene: Recognition and symbolic legacy. A carriage approached along the palace drive, carrying the king and several advisors. The king stepped down, smiling warmly at Elior. "You have done more than I could have imagined," he said, voice calm but filled with respect. "The kingdom owes a debt to your courage, Elior, not only for the orphanage but for all who have learned from your example." Elior bowed, a gesture of respect and humility. "It was not only my courage, your majesty. It was the hope, support, and strength of all those around me. I only spoke the truth." The king nodded. "And in doing so, you have inspired justice, compassion, and change. Courage, even in the smallest hearts, can transform the greatest kingdoms." Nearby, children paused in their games to watch the exchange. For them, Elior was not a distant figure or legend. He was tangible proof that bravery mattered, that integrity could triumph, and that even those who seemed powerless could make a difference. Scene: The kingdom flourishes. Months passed, and the story of Elior's courage became a quiet legend, spreading throughout the kingdom. Officials who had once been corrupt worked with newfound diligence. Citizens held each other accountable, and education and opportunity became more widely available. The ripple of truth and justice, started by one small boy, had grown into a wave that reshaped lives and society itself. Elior continued to guide the children, teach the principles he had learned, and advise the king when difficult decisions arose. His voice was respected, his judgment valued. But he never sought power for its own sake. His focus remained on justice, truth, and protecting those who could not protect themselves. Scene: lasting relationships and forgiveness. Even Madame Vorn, once cruel and relentless, returned to the city under supervision. Over time, she expressed remorse, her bitterness tempered by witnessing the positive changes around her. Elior forgave her, not for her sake, but to free himself from the lingering shadows of anger. Forgiveness, he realized, was another form of courage. Mara and the other children who had once been quiet and fearful now thrived, their voices confident and strong. They became teachers, caretakers, and guides for new generations of orphans. Elior watched them, feeling a quiet pride. The courage he had once thought insignificant had grown beyond himself, shaping countless lives. Scene: symbolic closure. One late afternoon, Elior and the king walked together through the palace gardens. The air was soft, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the faint hum of the city beyond. Elior glanced at the children playing by the fountain, their laughter ringing like music. The king paused and gestured to the courtyard. "Do you see them, Elior? These children are free to dream, to hope, to live without fear. You made this possible." Elior smiled, a calm and steady expression. "We all did, Your Majesty. But I learned that even the smallest voice can reach the highest throne." The king nodded. He placed a hand briefly on Elior's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of respect and admiration. Together they watched the sun dip behind the palace spires. The courtyard, once a place of fear and suffering, now glimmered with possibility, laughter, and light. And in that quiet moment, Elior understood that the courage he had discovered as a boy, courage to speak truth in the face of pain, fear, and injustice, had grown into a legacy. One voice had indeed changed a world. As the children ran and played, the palace gates stood tall, the spires gleamed in the golden light, and Elior knew that the seed of hope he had planted would continue to flourish for generations. The boy who had once been beaten for speaking the truth had grown into the man who had shown a kingdom that integrity, bravery, and compassion were stronger than fear, and that true courage could change everything.